friends, it's Carrie. Welcome back to my channel. Tonight I'm going to talk about one of my favorite topics, President Harry Truman. Just kidding. Of course, it's John F. Kennedy, but I am going to mention Harry Truman. This week I read The Letters of John F. Kennedy, which is a compilation of letters edited by historian Martin W. Sandler. And it's just a sampling of some of the millions of documents that are located in John F. Kennedy's presidential library. And I do think that this is a very well-rounded picture of the man, the president, and the time period that he lived in and the challenges that he faced as president. Unfortunately, with John F. Kennedy, there is a tendency of many historians to either perpetuate this sort of hero worship and mythos of Camelot, or to sensationalize the scandals that President Kennedy had in his personal life. And I don't think that either one of those representations is very fair. Obviously, President Kennedy was a flawed man, but I think you can give an honest representation of history without doing either of those things. I don't think there's a need to idealize, and I don't think there's a need to denigrate. And I don't think that you have to negate someone's contributions just because they have made some mistakes or they're not perfect. Just because this lady has a little Kennedy shrine, that doesn't mean I've fallen victim to the mythos. So even if you don't know anything about Kennedy, I think this is a great book for you to read because it really gives you some insight into his personality. It's extremely witty. There are a lot of really funny anecdotes in here. There are letters from children. There are letters from celebrities to President Kennedy. There are lots of exchanges between President Kennedy and very famous world leaders like Winston Churchill and Nikita Khrushchev and Eleanor Roosevelt, and I mean, the list goes on. There's even a telegram in here from the Duke, John Wayne. So there's a little bit of everything in this book, and it covers a large span of time. There's even a couple letters in here from his childhood. So I think there's something in here for everyone, and even if you know a lot about Kennedy, there are plenty of things in here for you. Obviously, as you can see from my tabs, I found a lot of really interesting little nuggets. A couple of those I want to point out from the very start are specific to my booktube peeps. Even if you don't read nonfiction and even if you are not interested in Kennedy, I know you'll be interested in this because it has to do with reading. It has to do with the love of books. Kennedy was not only a reader, but Kennedy was a writer. Kennedy wrote 2 books. And the first book was a bestseller, and the second book won a Pulitzer Prize, even though he technically had a ghostwriter with the second book, but that's for a different video. He kept a loose leaf notebook with him all the time, and he wrote down sentences, quotes, words that he thought were interesting, things that he came across that he thought he should remember. And that's something that really resonates with me because that's something that I do as well. I have a planner. I have lots of loose leaf notebooks that I have at work, I have at home, and so that's something that Kennedy and I have in common. There's a really neat telegram exchange where Kennedy is sending a mock telegram. It's basically a joke to the president of the American Booksellers Association because they are having a convention in Washington, D.C. And essentially he is chiding this president for not selling enough copies of his book, Why England Slept. And it's supposed to be a joke because this was his first book, and it was a bestseller, but He's talking about how, as an author loyal to the traditions of this craft, I'm deeply sorry not to be able to join you in person in order to discuss the inadequacy of the sales of a book called Why England Slept. However, my brother, Robert, whose book sold even less well than mine, will come among you tonight, and I advise no one to appear without copies of his Enemy Within. I trust that the Attorney General's appearance will inspire you to sell more books to more people than ever before in the next 12 months. What he says next is kind of what I love here. Now that reading is becoming increasingly respectable in America, I want, both as an author and as a reader, to express my gratitude to the men and women who have lived with books, loved them, sold them, and kept them as an indispensable part of life. So he's just basically sending a quick note of thanks, and he starts it out with a joke, and it's just meant to be a quick little note. And this telegram was obviously taken seriously by this gentleman, because he sends a reply, and basically he reassures the president that the paperback edition of Why England Slept is selling well, and they have sold 17,000 copies, and that he assures him that they're going to sell more. But I just thought this was so funny. But to hear Kennedy talk about reading and talk about books, it just kind of makes me love Kennedy even more. Of course it does. So that's one of the things I had to share with you guys. So if you're curious, this is Why England Slept, and this was President Kennedy's senior thesis, which was turned into a bestseller. And when it was published, a lot of people saw it as basically his justification for why his father supported Neville Chamberlain's appeasement policy with Hitler, because his father at the time was the U.S. ambassador to England. I didn't see it that way. You might not either. I saw it as more of a pretty well researched commentary on British politics of the day. Talks about how the League of Nations really set up England and the European countries to be so ill prepared for Hitler's aggression. It was politically unpopular for political candidates in Britain to talk about military preparedness and to talk about rearmament. I didn't see it as John trying to defend his father's honor in any way. And actually, if you read some of the letters between John and his father, you'll see that he gives his father some pretty solid advice when it comes to dealing with this issue. If you can find a copy of this is worth a read. Some other cool little tidbits in here. You probably know, I don't know, you probably don't know. I just kind of think people know these things now because I talk about Kennedy a lot, and the people I'm around know these things now, and so I assume that you all probably know these things, and you may or may not know these things. So you know that Kennedy started the U.S. physical fitness program. In the Sports Illustrated magazine, Kennedy writes an article titled "The Soft American," and he talks about how throughout our history, our struggle against aggressors has been won on the playgrounds and corner lots and fields of America. So he wants to make sure that our kids are physically fit. And so he starts this physical fitness program. And there's a connection here to Peanuts. I love Peanuts and Snoopy and Woodstock memorabilia, so I have to give a shout out to my friend Jane because she gave me almost my entire Peanuts collection. And I know she's watching because she's awesome. But it says in here that the emphasis on physical fitness was embraced even by comic strip creators, most notably Charles Schulz, whose beloved character Snoopy encouraged youngsters to do their daily dozen exercises. And I know she remembers all about this. But what I found really cool about this book is there are several letters in here from children asking President Kennedy about his physical fitness, which I thought was really interesting because, of course, we know all about President Kennedy's health problems. There were a couple of just heartbreaking letters written to President Kennedy from young girls complaining about inadequate footwear to participate in the physical fitness program. And these are things that I kind of took for granted. I didn't realize that that was such a problem, that most of the shoes that they could purchase had pointed toes, and that was not appropriate for any of the physical fitness programs that the president was promoting. And so they appealed to the president to work with shoe manufacturers to try to popularize round-toed shoes, which I thought was really interesting. And one little girl had already appealed to shoe manufacturers and had received no response. What I would have liked in some of the letters is kind of a note or something as to whether Kennedy responded or not. But one girl also complained that she was not able to access her school gym, that the boys were able to use the gym for physical fitness and the girls were told to do their exercises at home. And of course, this was long before Title IX, so equitable use of facilities was not in play, which of course is very disheartening, but just a reminder of how things were in 1962. There are also some pretty revealing letters in here that I had never seen. I was very surprised to find a revealing letter between Kennedy and Inga Binga. Inga Binga was his pet name for a Danish journalist that he had an affair with in 1941. And she had ties to Adolf Hitler because she was his guest during the 1936 Olympics. And so she was actually under FBI surveillance, and that's how the FBI had several encounters between the young Kennedy and Inga on tape, which got him into a little bit of hot water. I'm kind of shocked they included this letter, but I'm glad they included the letter because it gives a very, again, well-rounded picture of Kennedy, and it included a very revealing account of the PT-109 incident during World War II, which I had never heard from Kennedy's perspective about one of the young men that did not make it. So I found that quite interesting. There were also several letters and telegrams from incidents, major crisis incidents throughout the civil rights movement that I found quite interesting, kind of moment-to-moment type things, and the Cuban Missile Crisis. So when you're reading this book, you kind of feel like you're there in the moment. So I don't want to give away, I do feel like I've kind of rambled on and talked a lot about this book, but if you read it, I don't feel like I've given too much away. You do feel like you're in the moment, you are there, and I know it looks kind of thick, but it's really not, because a lot of the telegrams, take up a lot of space because they are in all caps. And it's one of those things you can kind of skip around. You can kind of look through it, see if something interests you, jump around. Truman, of course. President Truman is in this book a lot. And I adore President Truman's candor. I love President Truman's frank advice, his no-nonsense manner of speaking, and the fact that pretty much in every letter, he just recognizes that, hey, for what it's worth, this is what I think, take it or leave it, it is what it is sort of thing. And, you get the sense that he recognizes that his opinion is not necessarily of any greater value than anyone else's opinion. Never read a biography of President Truman. I strongly suggest that you do, because he is the last president that we had to not have a college education, which I'm not saying a college education is not a good thing to have. His sort of education was a different sort of education, and I think that's reflected in his leadership style, and also the way that he talks to people and how he managed people. And there's something to be said for how he was able to get things done. So I know Harry Truman is not my favorite president, but I do enjoy reading his writings. I just enjoy how he speaks. It's refreshing to hear someone speak with such candor, and he is very frank, and there are several moments in the book where he doesn't agree with Kennedy, and he makes some valid points. He makes some good points. One of the most interesting relationships that you will see in this book is the relationship between John F. Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev, and those letters are actually some of the longest letters in the book. They did have a secret letter exchange that was quite productive, I would say, and they do end up signing the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, and it's pretty clear to me that they were on a path that was leading to some sort of détente. Chairman Khrushchev, it's apparent, was quite upset when Kennedy was assassinated, and the book actually ends with Jackie Kennedy's letter to Nikita Khrushchev. She chooses to write to him on her last night in the White House, and I thought that was a chilling and appropriate way to end this collection of letters. There's wit, there's humor, you get to hear a politician talk in well-formed paragraphs, not just sound bites, and it's quite refreshing. So I would strongly suggest you pick up the Letters of John F. Kennedy. Thanks for joining me, guys. I'll see you next time.